Hello, everyone. I am Mykhailo Minakov, and I am the Kennan Institute Senior Advisor on Ukraine. I am delighted to moderate a short discussion today about our recently published edited volume, From the Ukraine to Ukraine, A Contemporary History. Our book was published at the Ibidem Verlag at Stuttgart and edited by Georgy Kasyanov, Matt Rajansky, and myself. The Kennan Institute at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars worked with 20 scholars from Ukraine and the West who contributed to this book their descriptions and analysis of Ukrainian contemporary history. The book features 9 chapters, ranging from Ukrainian society and culture to economics and politics in its recent 30-year history. Since we cannot have all 20 scholars in one video, today we shall discuss just one aspect of this book, intersection of power, religion, media, and art in contemporary Ukraine. Today we will feature a conversation with several of our contributors who worked on 3 of the chapters in this book, chapters which focus on the topics of religion, media, and art. We hope to give you a glimpse of what the book is about and a chance to hear from our authors directly about why this book is important for scholars of Ukraine. Let me start by introducing Marta Dichok, who co-authored a chapter for the book on Ukraine's media, a field where power is contested. Marta Dichok is Associate Professor at the Department of History and Political Science at Western University. Marta is also a fellow at the University of Toronto's Munk School of Global Affairs and an adjunct professor at the National University of Kyiv Mohyla Academy. Marta, can you tell us about your chapter and the big story you try to tell about Ukrainian power and mass media during the post-Soviet transition?
Thank you very much for publishing this book and inviting myself and Diane to be part of it. As you've mentioned, we wrote the chapter on mass media. And in my opinion, mass media is the thing to be studying in Ukraine and globally. The big argument we're making, as the title suggests, is that by looking at media, we can see what is happening in the country. The larger power struggles that have characterized the 30 years of independence are more clearly visible when we look at what's happening in the media. And we're using Pierre Bourdieu's theoretical framework of habitus and field, where he presents this idea that to understand societal, political, economic identity changes, looking at the media reveals it. So that's what we're doing in our chapter. And I got interested in this. I was a PhD student at Oxford, went to Ukraine to do archival research on World War II refugees. This was March of 1991. The Soviet Union was teetering around me, and I thought, oh, this is way too interesting to be sitting in archives. So I got myself a job as a journalist with a British newspaper called The Guardian. And I watched all of these developments happening in Ukraine from the perspective of a journalist. I was in Parliament when independence was declared, the referendum, etc. And then I thought, nobody is studying the evolution of media in Ukraine. So that became my research topic. And what I saw through watching the media is all the behind the scenes things that are happening become visible to the audience, to us, to anybody who's watching. So what we're doing in the chapter is we're tracing the history of what happened. We start with sort of the late Glasnost years, and we take it right up to President Zelensky. And we see how Ukraine's media system transformed from being this closed, centrally controlled party, Communist Party controlled system from Moscow to a media landscape that actually looks very similar to what we see in established democracies. One of the big themes that we talk about is political economy. Who owns the media and why it matters? And this is something that starts with Glasnost because initially the Communist Party owns all the media. And now we see that the media is owned primarily by large businessmen who often are called oligarchs. And the interesting development, which we didn't get a chance to talk to too much because it happened pretty recently, is the evolution of public broadcasting, which is probably the only remaining watchdog media form globally. So you've got this large, diverse media landscape, which is lots of different formats, everything from the traditional television, newspapers, radio, to all sorts of social media. And by looking at how this media system evolves, we see the evolution of the oligarchs, because they're the ones who start making money. And one of the first things they do is they become owners of what initially are little media outlets, and then they build these empires. And how they got the broadcast licenses, because the TV is the really interesting part, that shows the close links between politics and economics. Because why did the people who got the licenses for the state TV channels? Because they had access to the president. Lots of people wanted to own media, but only certain people were able to have that access. So when we unpack that relationship, the behind the scenes is revealed. Another interesting theme that we draw through the whole chapter is this idea of identity, because media shapes the way people think and it reflects the way people think. It's not one or the other, it's both. So by looking at the types of media that evolve and the types of messages that are put into society through the media, we see how the identity of Ukrainians is shifting. And this is something that it's an ongoing process, and it's something that we still see today, that what it is to be Ukrainian, the issue of language, the issue of commemoration of holidays, how this is presented in the media, how this is framed in the media, and who is controlling the message. Those are the questions that we're looking at. And the other final point is what impact this is having on society. To what degree are Ukrainian audiences, in whatever media format, are they accepting the messages that are being transmitted through the media? And to what degree are they not responding? And to what degree there is a competition between different political groups, different ideas, different economic groups, and sectors of society. So that's in a nutshell what we talk about in the chapter. And I'm not going to tell you anymore because I want you to buy the book and read the chapter. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Marta. That's an amazing story. And I would like to bring another of our speakers into the conversation. Let me introduce Elena Martinyuk, one of the co-authors of a chapter for the book on Ukrainian art of the independence era. Elena Martinyuk is a Petroyatsik postdoctoral research fellow in Ukrainian studies at the Harriman University of Columbia, Harriman Institute of Columbia University, sorry. And she is an art historian with an interest in art theory and art philosophy. Her research focuses on Ukrainian and Russian art from the late 20th century to the present. Elena, can you also tell us about your chapter and this big story, big narrative about Ukrainian art in recent 30 years?
Thank you so much for this introduction and also for the invitation to work on this book. It was a great delight to participate in the project. And the chapter was co-authored by me and Oksana Barshinova from the National Art Museum of Ukraine. And so I'm talking about the narrative that we both developed. And just before I begin, I wanted to show that the book I'm holding, it has art illustration on the cover. And I really want to argue that art has so much more to offer than just to be a mere illustration, which is of course beautiful and attractive. But in our chapter, we just show how studying art can reveal very important processes that are going like they're unfolding in the society simultaneously with the art. And I would like to note like three big issues that our chapter is dealing with. So first of all is this gradual waning of the Soviet, both as a category or as the everyday materiality, and how during all those 30 years, the Soviet is coming back with a vengeance, so to speak. How artists would engage with the Soviet, for instance, as the category of their training, like the socialist realist canon, and their training primarily in the easel painting, and I'm talking about the earliest artists of this transitional generation. Seemingly, this generation was supposed to get rid of the Soviet remnants of their education, and now just be transformed into some kind of new entity. But of course, as art material reveals, it's not happening overnight. And so if we're talking about trans avant-garde, so they are in clear dialogue with the socialist realist practice. But then, even after they abandoned painting as a media and they moved to video art and performances, which are documented, like by Arsen Savadov. Royburt is switching to video making. We see that Soviet mutates in this kind of phantasmagoric category and is coming back in this kind of very absurd and strange way in those video art moments, while the Soviet Union is still sort of continues to exude the metastatic order into the society, and the way people think and perceive, and it goes back until very recent moments of decommunization and how artists are involved in this large discussion about what are we going to do with this material remnants of the Soviet past. Are we going to get rid of them, eliminate them completely, or maybe we should use them as the tool? Well, so that's one big thing that obviously is revealed through our chapter. A second very big issue is this, so to speak, catching up with history that artists demonstrate. The years of the Soviet isolation, of course, brought this kind of very urgent need that was very clearly formulated in the end of the Soviet Union to sort of catch up with all the styles that they were missed, to catch up with the local history of, let's say, avant-garde, which was forbidden, hidden, very little known. So it was both simultaneously desire to connect with the local and global history, and this kind of melancholic realization that so much was missed, and this fervent need to catch up. And it still resonates. Again, we are talking about the entire 30 years, and each generation reacts to this fact in their own unique way, but it's still here. The fact that Ukraine was a colonial nation. It didn't have to, it was not able to write its own history, so its history was not written, and so much is not known, and all of this resonates through many artworks that we discussed. And the third issue is this birth of directly politically engaged art or protest art, and this is the art is very closely connected to the three Ukrainian revolutions: revolution on the granite, a revolution on Orange Revolution and Euromaidan Revolution. And we are talking how these monumental events affected art production in Ukraine. So that's it. I really hope you will enjoy reading this chapter as much as we enjoyed writing it.
Thank you very much, Helena. I must admit that after reading your chapter, your and Oksana's chapter, I started looking at many known artists in a different way, and I hope our readership will do as well. Well, and now I want to bring out our last speakers into the conversation. Let me introduce Jose Casanova and Timofey Brig, who co-authored the chapter on religious pluralism in Ukraine. Jose Casanova is a world-renowned sociologist of religion, and he is a senior fellow at the Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs, and emeritus professor of sociology and theology and religious studies at Georgetown University. Timofey Brig is assistant professor of policy research at the Kyiv School of Economics, a Fulbright visiting scholar at New York University, and a visiting Vujicic Fellow at the Stanford Center for Russian, Eastern European, and Eurasian Studies. Now it's your time to tell us the big story of your chapter. Jose, please start.
I would ask Timofey to go first. He did most of the work, so I want him to and I already participated in the Ukrainian version of this event and Ukrainian TV. So please, Timofey, you go ahead.
Sure, thanks a lot. And also, if I say something, wrong, you can always jump in and correct me. Yeah, thanks for inviting us, our team, to contribute to this book. It was a wonderful experience to write this chapter together with Jose. So what are the big stories in our chapter? I think our big story is threefold, actually, because any big story has many facets. The first big story we want to tell is a story of religious revivals. Religion was prohibited, it was banned in Soviet Union, but it is not banned in Ukraine anymore. But the most important part here is that religious revivals are still going in Ukraine, whereas many other European societies, they are on the path of secularization. In Ukraine, the role of religion has not only increased, it has been growing unstoppably. Another big part of our story is actually pluralism per se. We are talking about a very diverse and versatile religious landscape in Ukraine, which is quite unprecedented for this region. Ukraine has so many different religious groups. Orthodox Church is fragmented in different jurisdictions. We have Roman Catholics and Greek Catholics, ethnic minorities of Jews, Muslims, Hungarian Protestants, and so forth and so forth. But the most important part here is not just that these different people, they believe in different gods or that they have different spiritual experiences. It is also about how this religious landscape is organized. We are talking about organized religious groups. They all have their hierarchies, they have resources, they have media presence, impact on culture, economics, politics. This is very important when we are talking about religion in Ukraine. And finally, I think the third big story we are at least we're trying to tell, it's not about people and it is not about religion, it is about science, it is about sociology. We ask a question whether we have indeed relevant tools and devices to understand what's going on in Ukraine. Do we have good theories? Do we have data? Do we understand the data? And I think we're showing the paper in this chapter that a lot of people before us, when analyzing religion in Ukraine, used to consider Ukraine at the very kind of aggregated level of macro regions. However, when you do this, it's not really efficient. You cannot tease out independently the effects of economy, demography, historical heritage on religion. So what we do, we bring in these more detailed data at the level of sub-regions, at the level of many different years. So we have very detailed spatial and temporal comparisons. And on top of that, we engage in the theoretical discussion, because obviously the story of religion in Ukraine is very complex, and it's very difficult to address it from one particular theoretical perspective. So we try to amalgamate these different perspectives of religious market perspective with theories of Brubaker about nationalism and religion, theories of Ronald Inglehart about existential insecurities, and finally we add this flavor of old style, but very relevant and very necessarily historical sociology. And I think this is also a big part of our chapter. And I hope that readers will enjoy reading it and learning something about Ukraine and how sociology can address religion in general.
If I may add just 3 brief points, the fundamental story is one from a religious monopoly, a situation in which only the Russian Orthodox Church in Ukraine was the only church, to the emergence of competing national churches, to the point where you had 4 churches claiming to be the national church of Ukraine, 3 Orthodox, 1 Greek Catholic. Under such a situation, then you don't have churches, you have denominations. So the big story is Ukraine is the only country in Europe that has broken with the model of the national church and minority religions to create a situation of denominations, like the United States. Second, because the churches compete at the high level, then below all the minorities can also grow. And you have the tremendous explosion of Pentecostal, Baptist churches, which are very active. So this is the first point. The second is that this is not only a story of Ukraine, the religious field in Ukraine itself, but that this religious field is linked to transnational field. So I say now there are actually 3 national churches linked through the 3 Romes. The Greek Catholic Church linked to Rome, the Orthodox Church of Ukraine linked to Constantinople, the Ecumenical Patriarch, and the still called Orthodox Church of Ukraine Moscow Patriarchate linked to Moscow. But as you follow the news in the last 2 weeks, and Putin is arguing they are going to defend the Russian Orthodox Church in Ukraine, and then the head of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine saying, you see, even Putin says that this is not an Orthodox Church of Ukraine, but it's the Russian Orthodox Church in Ukraine. So why don't they change their name? So this story is a story of power, and it's a story of transnational power. It's not finished yet. Bartholomew is supposed to come to the 30th anniversary of the independence of Ukraine. And this, of course, is something which Russia doesn't want at all. So a lot of conflict is going to develop around it. So, and the third point, which I want to make, is that despite this competition, there is a fundamental structure of interreligious recognition and dialogue in Ukraine. All the religious communities of Ukraine are together in an association that includes all the Orthodox churches, the Greek Catholics, Roman Catholics, all the Protestants, Jews, Muslims, all of them. And the organization is actually changed the presidency every 6 months. So right now, the presidency is in the hands of the Greek Catholic Church. Before it was in the head of the Jews. So the Jews, the chief rabbi took all the religious groups of Ukraine to Jerusalem to have their meeting there. So this in itself, the fact that despite this religious pluralism, these religious groups can work together in civil society is one of the signs of the vibrancy of a pluralist civil society in Ukraine.
Thank you, Jose. Indeed, this chapter is revealing a lot of interesting things about contemporary Ukrainian experience and very diverse. Well, now we are moving to the part which is connected with another question. You told us about the big stories of your chapters. And this experience, Ukrainian experience in recent 30 years was indeed very interesting. It's a lot of invention of democracy in formerly authoritarian, post-totalitarian Soviet Union, invention of multitude of religions, invention of free mass media, invention of freedom in contemporary art. So a lot of new experiences. However, why should it be interesting for outside audiences? And we now have authors who live, Jose and Olena, in the United States. Marta lives in Canada, and Timofey has, although he speaks from Ukraine, you have very rich experience of dealing with Western academia as well. Why do you think Western academia and Western readers and American readers should be interested in our book? I would like to start with Olena and Jose, and then with Marta and Timofey. Olena.
Thank you, Mykhailo, for posing this question. Why a Western audience would be interested to read, in particular, our chapter with Oksana Bershino? Well, in art history of recent years, globally, the issue of regional modernisms was really growing in importance. And in order to, so to speak, calibrate the global canon, it's very important to study both with both of this kind of main development of certain styles and aesthetics, but also see how they were reflected in multiple responses from all over the globe. And in our chapter, we also note and trace how, for instance, this Ukrainian neo-expressionist was in certain dialogue with Italian trans avant-garde. So we are talking in many ways about some kind of distorted echoes, but at the same time, it just makes, in general, the picture of the style globally so much richer, And also, in general, for this book, I believe, but for not only for our chapter, but for the book in general, it's very important to understand that Ukraine, as a like post-colonial nation, was in many previous histories was treated merely as an object of study. But this book is definitely gives voice to internal perspective and really kind of stresses it. So I really hope through this book and similar publications, Ukraine will appear more and more as a subject which is telling its own history.
Something is happening with Olena's connection. Thank you for this, Olena. And Jose, could you please give your
the key idea will see the post-colonial moment. Mm-hmm. In a post-colonial country that tries to establish its own identity, its own state, its own nation, its own market economy, its own civil society, to rejoin Europe, and yet in a geopolitically very difficult condition. And so, because Ukraine is an unfinished project, it's a project of developing a democratic nation within Europe to join Europe, but the big neighbor doesn't want to recognize even the right of Ukraine to exist. And we see the condition is the situation of the war in Donetsk right now. One of the great stories of the fall of the Soviet Union, it happened without violence, right? Here you have a new nation, 50 million people without violence. And yet we realized that the condition was present, the Helsinki Accord, that there will be no change of borders by force. And now we see that Russia has broken this condition, reoccupy Crimea, and now enter a war in Eastern Ukraine. So this is a fundamental question for Europe. And of course, for the United States in the last 4 years, Ukraine has been in the news every time. But there is very little understanding of the complexity of the story, of the complexity of the situation, of the complexity of the developments and the difficulties, both the problems, the achievements, the fundamental inheritances of the Soviet Union that basically is very difficult to get rid of. So for this, it's crucial for geopolitically for the future of Europe. It is crucial, if you wish, for the world order, because it is going to be still a play where many of the world order, the future of democracy, the future of international relations is going to be determined.
Thank you very much. Okay, that's passionate answers. That's interesting from within America. But now what our authors from Canada and Ukraine think. Marta.
I really like the question because we as academics, we like to spend a lot of time reading and thinking and analyzing. But I think this book is going to be very interesting to a large audience. And the reason that is because what's happening in the United States is affected by what's happening in Ukraine. Ukraine's not the only country that's affecting the United States, but who interfered in the US election? And if we look at Ukraine and what's been happening in Ukraine, Yevhen Fedchenko from the Cave Hill Academy said this: Ukraine was a testing lab for Russian interference, cyber interference, information warfare against the United States and other countries as well. So by looking at what's going on in Ukraine, Americans can get an insight into what's happening to them. And I think that is the way to look at issues, not just from a purely academic perspective that our knowledge will increase, but this affects us very, very directly. So by looking at what's been happening in Ukraine's media, that helps explain to Americans what's happening in their own country. So I think that is one of the reasons. And what's already been said, that understanding the larger geopolitical changes, very often Ukraine isn't given enough attention. Everybody focuses on the big players, China, Russia. But as Brzezinski said way back in '94, I think it was, understanding Russia, you need to know what's going on in Ukraine. And without the understanding of the internal dynamics and the international ones, the analysis very often is skewed. And if we watch media reporting about Ukraine, about the war, a lot of the Russian narrative is still being repeated in international media outlets. And I think books like this one are a way to sort of open up the discussion so that Ukraine really is understood for the role that it's playing. So that's why I think Americans and Canadians and others will find this book of great interest.
Thank you, Marta. And finally, Timothy, the floor is yours.
Yes, I want to follow up to this point that the book should be also of interest for the general audience. So to me, the answer is quite obvious. I think a lot of American readers would be quite interested to learn that Ukraine has a lot of similarities, surprisingly, to the United States. Jose has already mentioned that the religious model of Ukraine resembles the one in the United States. I can also tell now that it's kind of a teaser to another project that we are working on, but my team and I, we worked on replicating some findings from the United States in Ukraine regarding the so-called Christian nationalism. Christian nationalism is a quite recent concept that appeared in the scientific literature, explaining this amalgamation of two types of ideologies, nationalistic and religious one. For example, if someone in the United States believes that America is a Christian nation, or that Americans are God-protected people, then these people are likely to discredit some of the scientific ideas. They would be skeptical towards vaccination. You can also predict their electoral behavior. So in a very simple empirical manner, my colleagues and I, we were able to find some similar results for Ukraine. And I think there are so many other similarities that yet to be discovered. So I think the audience could enjoy just learning about other geographical areas that, despite all the differences, still surprisingly show some similarities. And I also think that the academic audience, and I'm thinking about people, like PhD students or postdocs, I think this kind of people would really enjoy to learn, and maybe they will actually benefit from learning about Ukraine as a possible testing ground for their scientific hypothesis. You could pick up any theory or any ambitious hypothesis and try to replicate or to test it in another context and try to explain this feasibly, these similarities or differences. And I certainly did it myself when I was defending my dissertation in one of the European universities. And I believe that my colleagues could benefit from having access to this interesting, rich empirical data that Ukraine can provide to the international group of scholars.
Thank you, Timothy. Thank you very much, colleagues, for this conversation and our discussion. I'd like to thank to all of you who joined me today for this short discussion about the interplay of power, mass media, art, and religion in post-Soviet Ukraine. To everyone who is watching this, we have just told you a bit about Ukrainian society and our book, From the Ukraine to Ukraine, A Contemporary History. But this discussion was just a tip of the iceberg. You can pick up a copy today through the publisher Ibidem Verlag from the Columbia University Press website or on Amazon, which we have links to on our website. In our book, you will be able to read not only the chapters from the speakers featured today, but also read concise and informative analysis of the diverse processes in Ukraine from the fall of Soviet Union to two Maidans and to the stormy year of 2021. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.